When 10-year-old Lily decided she couldn't remember her own last name, she knew she was in more trouble than any adult would ever believe. Sitting in a sticky booth at a roadside diner, the man who called himself her uncle watched her with eyes that never blinked. So, with a trembling hand, she scribbled 2 words on a greasy napkin, a silent scream she prayed someone would hear. That someone was Marcus Thorne, known to the world as Cold Train, the president of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, a man whose past as a homicide detective had taught him to see the fractures in a seemingly perfect picture. The moment his eyes locked on that desperate plea, he made a choice, setting off a chain of events that would shatter a quiet afternoon and forge a bond stronger than blood in the fires of a desperate rescue. The Gritty Spoon Diner was an outpost of fluorescent light and stale coffee marooned on the edge of a forgotten highway. It smelled of bacon grease, bleach, and the faint, weary sadness of 1,000 travelers who had passed through but never stayed. The vinyl on the booths was cracked like old leather, and the jukebox in the corner had been silent for a decade. It was a place for ghosts and people on the run, a perfect place to be invisible. For most patrons, the group of 3 bikers in the corner booth was just part of the scenery. They were large men, clad in the worn leather cuts of their club, the Iron Sentinels MC emblem a stark warning on their backs. They laughed quietly, their voices a low rumble beneath the clatter of cutlery. At their center sat their president, Marcus Thorne. Cold Train. He was 52, with a beard more salt than pepper and a build that spoke of a life that had demanded strength. His hands, resting on the table, were scarred and calloused, but they were steady. His eyes, however, were what set him apart. They were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. Before he led the Sentinels, Marcus had spent 20 years as a homicide detective. He'd retired, burned out by the darkness he'd waded through daily, but the instincts, the training, the curse of observation, that never left him. He could sit in a place like the Gritty Spoon and read the stories of everyone inside. The tired waitress saving her tips for a life she dreamed of elsewhere. The long-haul trucker on his 3rd cup of coffee, running from a silence at home. And the man in the booth across from them, with the little girl who didn't belong to him. Cold Train had noticed them the moment they walked in. The man was thin and wiry, with a nervous energy that vibrated off him. His clothes were cheap, his hair greasy. But it was his grip on the girl's arm that had first snagged Marcus's attention. It wasn't the guiding hand of a father. It was the grip of a jailer. The girl was a wisp. Maybe 9, maybe 10. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she wore a faded sweatshirt that swallowed her small frame. Her eyes were the most haunting part. They were wide and vacant, darting around the diner not with a child's curiosity, but with the frantic search of a cornered animal looking for an escape route. She was pale, too pale, with faint, bluish smudges under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and fear. He saw the man order for her a grilled cheese and a glass of water. The girl didn't speak, didn't look at the menu. She just stared at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. The man ate greedily, his eyes constantly scanning the room, the door, the windows. He was a man expecting trouble. Cold Train decided, right then and there, that he would be the one to give it to him. Marcus leaned slightly toward his brothers, Styx and Bear, without taking his eyes off the man and the girl. "See the booth by the window?" he murmured, his voice a low gravel. Bear, a mountain of a man whose nickname was an understatement, grunted in affirmation, not moving his head. Styx, lean and wiry like his namesake, gave a nearly imperceptible nod, his sharp eyes flicking over. They were his sergeants-at-arms, men he trusted with his life. They knew his tells. They knew when the cop in him was overriding the biker. "Something's not right," Marcus said. That was all he needed to say. For the Iron Sentinels, that was enough. He knew what a scared kid looked like. He'd seen it in interview rooms, at crime scenes, in the faces of children who had witnessed the absolute worst of humanity. This girl was wearing that same look. It was a mask of forced compliance, a desperate attempt to be small, to be invisible, to do nothing that might provoke the monster sitting across from her. The man was talking to her now, his voice a low hiss that didn't carry across the diner. But Marcus could read the body language. The man leaned forward, his posture aggressive. The girl flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Her shoulders hunched, and she shrank even further into the booth. Marcus's training screamed at him. Mismatched clothes. The girl's obvious fear. The man's hypervigilance. The possessive, painful way he held her. Each detail was a red flag, a piece of a puzzle he had assembled 100 times before. This was not a family outing. This was a hostage situation. He needed confirmation. He needed a signal. He needed the girl to know that someone was watching, that someone was ready. He tried to catch her eye, to offer a reassuring glance, but she was too terrified to look up from her plate. The grilled cheese sat untouched. The waitress came to refill the man's coffee. For a brief moment, his attention was diverted. He turned his head to speak to her, a greasy, false smile plastered on his face. It was the opening the girl needed. Her small hand, which had been clutching a red crème from the kids' menu, moved with desperate speed. She had a napkin tucked under her thigh. Marcus watched as she pulled it out, scribbled something on it, and then, with a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, she pushed it toward the edge of the table. She used her water glass to nudge it, making it look like an accident. The napkin teetered on the edge, then fell silently to the floor, landing face up. From his vantage point, Marcus could read it clearly. It wasn't 2 words. It was 1. Help. The single word, written in the shaky, uneven block letters of a child, hit him like a physical blow. The air in his lungs turned to ice. The low hum of the diner, the clatter of plates, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, it all faded into a roaring silence. There was no more doubt. No more suspicion. There was only the cold, hard certainty that he was looking at a child in the deepest kind of trouble. This was the signal. This was the moment where the world split into 2 paths, the one where he did nothing, and the one where he did everything. His blood went cold, but his mind became razor sharp. The detective, the protector he thought he had buried, surged to the surface. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to Styx and Bear. Their easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused, silent intensity. They understood. The hunt was on. The man finished his coffee, oblivious. He threw a few crumpled bills onto the table and then grabbed the girl's arm again, his fingers digging into her thin bicep. "Let's go," he snarled, pulling her out of the booth. She stumbled, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. She shot one last, desperate look across the room, and this time, her eyes met Marcus's. In them, he saw a universe of fear. But for a split second, he also saw a flicker of hope. She had seen him. She knew her message had been received. This was the split-second decision. The point of no return. Marcus could call the cops, wait, and risk the man disappearing with the girl into the anonymous blur of the highway. Or he could act. He could intervene. He could become the wall between that child and whatever hell she was living in. The risk of being wrong, of causing a scene over a misunderstanding, was a laughable grain of sand compared to the mountain of regret he would carry if he let her walk out that door. He chose the wall. As the man dragged the girl toward the front entrance, Marcus stood up. Bear and Styx rose with him. They didn't rush. They moved with a calm, deliberate purpose that was far more intimidating than any sudden aggression. 3 large men, silent and unmoving, became a human barrier blocking the only way out. The man stopped short, his eyes darting between them. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. "Excuse me," he said, trying to push past. "You're in our way." Marcus didn't move a muscle. He crossed his arms over his chest, his sheer size making the narrow aisle impassable. "Just stretching our legs," he said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that carried an unmistakable edge of command. Long-ride panic began to dawn in the man's eyes. He tugged harder on the girl's arm, trying to maneuver around them. "We need to get through." "I don't think you do," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. It was the voice he used to use in interrogation rooms, the one that stripped away lies and left only the raw, ugly truth. The man's face contorted with rage and fear. He realized this wasn't a coincidence. He had been made. He shoved the girl forward, using her as a shield. "Get out of my way. This is my daughter." The girl whimpered, a small, terrified sound. "Funny," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto the man's. "She doesn't look like you." The confrontation had escalated. The quiet diner was now frozen, all eyes on the standoff at the door. The waitress had her hand over her mouth, her other hand reaching for the phone behind the counter. The man, trapped, made a desperate move. He spun around, yanking the girl with him, and bolted for the back exit, the one that led to the kitchen and the rear parking lot. "Kitchen!" Marcus barked. But Styx was already moving. He had anticipated the move, flanking their position like a seasoned soldier. With 3 long strides, he was at the kitchen, swinging doors, planting his feet and blocking the escape route. The man skidded to a halt, finding his path blocked once again. He was cornered. A trapped animal. And trapped animals are the most dangerous. With a guttural scream of fury, he did the unthinkable. He shoved the little girl with all his might, sending her sprawling toward Marcus and Bear. It was a cruel, desperate gambit to create a diversion. As the bikers instinctively moved to catch the falling child, the man lunged for the front door again. But he underestimated their speed. He underestimated their resolve. Bear, despite his size, moved with surprising agility. He caught the girl, scooping her up and shielding her small body with his own massive frame before she could hit the floor. At the same instant, Marcus pivoted. The man had only taken 2 steps before he ran into a wall of solid muscle. Marcus didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. He simply wrapped his arms around the man in a crushing bear hug, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him back against the wall. The air rushed out of the man's lungs in a pained whoosh. His struggles were weak and pathetic against Marcus's unyielding strength. The fight was over before it had truly begun. Just as Marcus pinned the man, the wail of sirens cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second. The waitress had made the call. Help was coming. 2 sheriff's deputies burst through the door, weapons drawn, their eyes taking in the chaotic scene, the terrified patrons, the cowering man pinned to the wall by a giant biker, and another biker holding a small, trembling child. "Everybody freeze," one of the deputies yelled. Marcus slowly released his grip, raising his hands to show he was not a threat. "He was taking the girl," he said, his voice calm and steady. "She asked for help." The man, now gasping for air on the floor, began to scream. "They attacked me. This is my niece. They're crazy bikers. Arrest them." The deputies were young, cautious. They kept their weapons trained, trying to make sense of the situation. Just then, a more commanding presence filled the doorway. It was Sheriff Brody, a man whose face was a roadmap of long years in law enforcement. He and Marcus went way back. Brody's eye scanned the room, landing on Marcus. "Mark?" the sheriff asked, his voice laced with surprise. "What the hell is going on here?" "Just having lunch, Dave," Marcus replied, nodding toward the whimpering man on the floor. "This piece of trash was leaving with a girl who didn't want to go." Sheriff Brody looked from Marcus to the girl, who was now peeking out from behind Bear's massive arm. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the truth. He had known Marcus Thorne for 30 years. He knew the man's instincts were flawless. "Cuff him," Brody ordered his deputies, gesturing to the man on the floor. "And get a statement from everyone." He walked over to Marcus. "Good call, Mark." It was a good call, Marcus confirmed quietly. The validation was professional, but the real test was the child. The man was hauled to his feet, still shouting about his rights, about his niece. As they led him past the girl, she flinched and buried her face in Bear's leather jacket. The threat was neutralized. The immediate danger was over. The girl was safe. The diner slowly began to breathe again. The deputies took statements while paramedics checked on the girl, who refused to be separated from Bear. She was physically unharmed, but her eyes were still wide with shock. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to her level. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure not to intimidate her. Bear gave her a gentle nudge of encouragement. "Hey there," Marcus said, his voice softer than anyone in the diner would have thought possible. "You're safe now." "My name is Marcus." "What's yours?" She looked at him, her eyes tracing the lines on his face, the grey in his beard. She seemed to be deciding if he was another monster or something else entirely. After a long moment, she whispered a single word. Lily. A wave of relief washed over Marcus. "A name. A beginning." "That's a beautiful name, Lily," he said, offering a small, gentle smile. "It's nice to meet you. We were all very worried about you. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the good that still exists in the world." He needed more information for the sheriff, for the child services that were on their way. He had to ask the hard questions, as gently as he could. "Lily, can you tell me your last name?" She looked down at her feet, her small voice trembling as she delivered a line that would break his heart and change his life forever. "I don't have one," she whispered. Not anymore. The simple, devastating words hung in the air. A child with no name, no anchor, no family. She was adrift in the world, a ghost who had been captured by a predator. Marcus felt a fierce, primal protectiveness rise in him, stronger than anything he'd ever felt, stronger than loyalty to his club, stronger than the memory of his badge. In that moment, looking at this lost, brave little girl, he made a second promise, a silent vow to himself and to her. He hadn't just saved her from a man. He was going to save her from being nobody. The waitress, a kind woman named Flo, appeared with a steaming mug of hot chocolate piled high with whipped cream. She placed it gently on the table in front of Lily. "For the brave little lady," she said, her eyes misty. It was the first step to healing, a simple act of kindness in the wake of terror. Lily stared at the mug as if it were a magical artifact. Slowly, she reached out and took it in her small hands, the warmth spreading through her fingers. She took a tentative sip, and for the first time since she'd walked into the diner, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. Marcus sat with her, not pushing, not asking any more questions. He and his brother stayed right there, a silent guard of leather and steel, until the social worker arrived. He gave his official statement to Sheriff Brody, who clapped him on the shoulder. "Turns out your guy has a warrant out for his arrest in 2 states for human trafficking," Brody said. "You didn't just save this one, Mark. Who knows how many others you saved." When the time came for Lily to leave with the social worker, she hesitated. She looked back at Marcus, her eyes filled with a terrifying uncertainty. He was the man who had saved her, but he was still a stranger. The world was full of dangerous strangers. Marcus knelt down once more. "You're going to a safe place now, Lily," he said. "People are going to take care of you. And I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to check on you." I promise he meant it. Every word. And somehow, she knew he did. She gave a small, hesitant nod before taking the social worker's hand and walking out of the diner, leaving a profound silence in her wake. A year can be a lifetime. 1 year after that fateful day at the Gritty Spoon, the world was a different place for both Marcus Thorne and the little girl who once had no name. The investigation had revealed the grim truth: Lily was an orphan, lost in a broken system. The man had abducted her from an underfunded and neglectful group home, preying on a child nobody would miss. She had no family to return to, no one to claim her. She was utterly alone. But Marcus had made a promise. He and his wife, Clara, a warm, fiercely loving woman who was the undisputed queen of the Iron Sentinels, had followed through. They'd spent that year navigating the labyrinth of social services, the endless paperwork, the court dates, the background checks, and the home visits. They fought for her. They showed up. 6 months ago, a judge had banged a gavel, and the little girl who didn't have a last name was given one. She became Lily Thorne. Now, she was no longer a ghost. She was a vibrant, laughing 10-year-old. The fear that had haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by the mischievous sparkle of a child who knew she was safe, who knew she was loved. She was enrolled in school, making friends, and discovering a passion for drawing. Their small ranch, once a quiet refuge for a retired cop and his wife, was now filled with her laughter. She had a pony named Patches and a dog that followed her everywhere. The silence Marcus had once craved was now a chaotic, beautiful symphony of a family being built, note by note. The connection wasn't just lasting, it was permanent. Marcus, the grizzled, intimidating president of a motorcycle club, was now the man who attended parent-teacher conferences and learned how to braid hair. He was her father. The gruff biker had found a new road, a new purpose that resonated deeper than the rumble of his Harley. He wasn't just Cold Train anymore. He was Dad. But the impact of that day rippled even further outward. The Iron Sentinels, a club of tough, hardened men, had been profoundly changed by Lily's story. They had seen firsthand how easily a child could fall through the cracks. They had seen the courage of their president, who had refused to look away. Moved to action, the club organized a charity ride. They called it Lily's Run. The first event was a staggering success. Hundreds of bikers from clubs all over the state rode to raise money for children's advocacy centers and programs that helped at-risk youth. It became an annual tradition, their biggest and most important event of the year. The Iron Sentinels, once seen by the community as a group of intimidating outsiders, became known as fierce guardians of the innocent. They became a force for good, inspired by one little girl. We love hearing from our community, so tell us in the comments where you're watching from today and what this story means to you. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Marcus was in the garage, polishing the chrome on his beloved motorcycle. Lily sat on a stool beside him, a small rag in her hand, diligently cleaning a piece of the engine casing. She had his eyes, he thought. Not in genetics, but in their quiet, observant nature. She was quiet for a long time, the only sound the rhythmic squeak of their rags on the metal. Then, she asked the question he knew would come someday. "Dad," she said, her voice small but clear. "Why did you stop that day?" In the diner. Marcus paused his work. He put down his rag and turned to face her, giving her his full attention. He thought about the complex answer, about his training, his instincts, the darkness he'd seen in his career. But he knew she needed the simple, honest truth. "Because everyone deserves to have someone looking out for them, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone deserves a family. And sometimes, if you don't have one, you have to go out and build one. Or let one find you." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw a little girl who needed someone in her corner. And I guess I needed her in mine, too." Lily smiled, a bright, beautiful smile that lit up the entire garage. She leaned over and gave him a fierce hug, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. "Me too, kid," he murmured, holding her tight. Me too. The story of Cold Train and Lily became a quiet legend, a reminder that heroes are not defined by a uniform or a cape, but by the courage to act when they see something wrong. It is a testament to the fact that even on the loneliest highways, in the most forgotten places, there are protectors watching. It proves that the strongest families are not always the ones we are born into, but the ones we fight to create. The world is a better place because on one ordinary day, one good man refused to be a bystander. He saw a child who was invisible to everyone else, and he chose to see her, to hear her silent plea, and to give her not just his protection, but his name. And in doing so, he reminded us all of the most important lesson: look out for one another. Pay attention. And never, ever be afraid to be the one who stands up.